The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello everyone, and welcome to Ethical Corp's webinar on free, prior and informed consent and engagement with Indigenous peoples. This webinar has been put together as part of the knowledge exchange leading up to the Responsible Extractive Summits that we've got going on. The free, prior and informed consent issue is particularly important at the moment. It's included in the IFC's performance standards on environmental and social sustainability. And with over 700 people signed up to this webinar, all the way from Canada to Australia, this really is a truly global issue that needs to be addressed. Now, just before we start, if you haven't attended an Ethical Corp conference or webinar previously, we want to make this as interactive for you as possible. We want to hear your point of view and your questions, and we'll also have live polling running through the entire session. So feel free to post any questions in the comment box, and I'll try and address as many as possible. My name's Steve. I'm going to be hosting the webinar today, but more importantly, we've got 4 fantastic panelists with us. And just to introduce them, we've got Veronica Slater. Now, Veronica's the president of North Star Group and a member of the US Extractive Industry Transparency Initiative multi-stakeholder group, with over 30 years experience with rural communities and Indigenous peoples, particularly in Alaska. Prior to North Star Group, Veronica was working for the state of Alaska. Secondly, we've got Rebecca Adamson, a Cherokee economist and the founder and president of First Peoples Worldwide, who holds a distinct perspective on how Indigenous peoples' values and economic systems can transform business models today. Rebecca's worked directly with grassroots tribal communities and nationally as an advocate for local tribal issues. So we're really excited to hear from Rebecca today. We also have Art Cunningham. Now, Art is the Senior Aboriginal and Tribal Policy Advisor for the TransCanada Corporation. With years of experience, Art has helped manage engagement with over 150 Aboriginal communities in Canada and over 40 tribes in the United States. Among many awards, Art has been awarded the Chief David Crowchild Memorial Award, which is presented to persons who create bridges of understanding between Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal people. Art is also a proud Métis and was formally recognized for his success in the corporate world. And finally, we've got Dr. Chris Anderson. Now, Chris is an anthropologist with extensive experience in the mining industry around community engagement. Chris's experiences range from his native in Australia through to Africa, and most recently, Chris's work has had particular focus on Indigenous communities. Chris was a past chair of the International Council on Mining and Metals Human Rights and Indigenous Peoples Working Group, as well as being an adjunct professor of anthropology at the University of Queensland as well. So those are your panelists. Welcome to all of the panelists. Great to have you here. As you can see, we've got international experience today, and it would be great to see what the similarities and unique cultural considerations are in North America, Africa, Europe, and also in Australia. So I know we're all eager to get started, so what I'll do is I'll welcome panelists in, and then we'll go straight into our first poll and get your feedback. Okay, so the first poll is coming up now. We'd love you all to participate in this. So the question is, what do you feel is the biggest challenge when engaging with Indigenous people? Now, the options we have are stakeholder mapping, managing community expectations, understanding local cultural decision-making processes, gaining internal support and understanding, or a lack of resources, whether that's human or financial. So if you can put your answers in now, we'll finish the poll in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, and those results should be coming onto your screen now. As you can see, the overwhelming winner there is learning how to manage community expectations. I think what I'll do is, first of all, I'll come to you, Chris, and see what your feedback on that session is and what your thoughts on the results would be. And also, if you've got any practical advice on how you can manage expectations for such a long project, that would be fantastic as well.
Sure. Thanks, Steve. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, everyone, wherever you are. I respectfully disagree with all of the things because I don't think you can do any of them without a relationship with the community, which requires building up a knowledge base. So, you know, I think you've got to get, presumably we're talking about an entity like a company that needs to engage with Indigenous peoples. You can't do anything until you have a relationship. In Indigenous cultures, as all of our panelists and many of our listeners will know, are such that, you know, the notion of doing a deal with a stranger is impossible and unthinkable. And so until you have a relationship, which of course requires a commitment of people and resources and time to get to know a community and for them to get to know you and build up the trust, you won't really achieve any of those things as choices. So, I mean, I presume I'd probably, if I had to, go with understanding local cultural decision-making processes. But once again, you're not going to do that until you have a relationship with the community.
Absolutely. So there it is. The relationship with the community is key. And that all comes down to engagement. Now, I'll quickly go over to yourself, Rebecca. Now, First Peoples Worldwide represent the rights of Indigenous people across the world. I'd be really interested to get your thoughts on that and your feedback on how that relationship can develop.
Well, thank you, and the same good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to you all. And I agree with Chris. I was so glad he came out with his explanation, because we always say that the closer you engage with community, the better your chances are for success. And it's about getting close to the community, and that means relationship. But I think as practitioners, you get suboptimal information on that, and how your entry points and how you're going to build that relationship needs really optimal data. You need to understand the political landscape, the traditional governance, the contemporary governance, the links to the allies. How are decision makers dispersed in the community? Sometimes whale hunters are decision makers. Sometimes midwives are decision makers. You really need to understand the community, and that's about relationship building both ways, understanding them to build the relationship, and the relationship helps you understand them even deeper and broader. So there's informal and formal channels of communication. All of this helps you with more successful engagement, and it's relationship based.
Absolutely. No, I completely agree. And just to bring up something as well, you might have noticed that you can fire questions towards all of our panelists, and you can do that in the comment box on your computer screens as well. We have had quite an interesting question come up, and it'd be great to have the panel's feedback on this. And someone has asked, what if Aboriginal or Indigenous communities don't actually want to have a relationship with an extractive company? What would you say to them are the benefits, and what are those main reasons that what are the main causes of them not wanting to have a relationship with extractive companies, and how can you engage with them when you start off on that foot? So I think if I can go to Art. Sorry?
Yeah, okay. My mic's open, but you might want to give it to Art.
Yeah, I think, Art, it would be fantastic to get your point of view, because, of course, you are from the Métis tribe as well, but on top of that, you work with TransCanada, so you bridge both sides. So it'd be really interesting to hear your point of view on that question.
Yeah, I've had the opportunity to experience that challenge when you know, we have certainly knowledge of a community for whatever reason, and the reasons can be a lot. They can be their experience with other companies prior, or their dispute with land issues with the governing body of the country of the day, and they see that communicating or engaging with you could risk that issue, whether it's an issue over sovereignty or land jurisdiction or whatever. And the only thing, you know, does limit the tools and that you can apply. But I got to go with Chris and Rebecca. The relationship, the effort to bridge any opportunity is the effort that you're prepared to make come forth with building that relationship. And with any relationship efforts, you have to remain open. You have to take the time to understand the folks that you're inviting to sit down and have a discussion about what you believe you can, what the impact is, and what you believe you can leave with the community, and move it forward from there. But it does pose those challenges and does really limit the tools that are available for you, and those issues that bring the not wanting to talk to. And by the way, of all the different communities, that's rare. It's quite rare where you don't get the opportunity, at least for an audience. And the importance of having a reputation of working toward building a relationship really provides you that a better and stronger opportunity in any new areas that you do want to work, where you can show a demonstration or legacy of working positively. So that's the importance of not only building a relationship, but maintaining any relationship that you've got in any other areas, because if you can demonstrate that, that helps provide that level of opportunity to open the door to maybe start creating the discussions that could lead into a more positive relationship.
Fantastic. No, that's great, Art. Thank you for that. And I'll just quickly on this question, because we've got loads of questions popping up, and I know that we only have a limited amount of time today. But Veronica, it would be fantastic to bring you in and hear your thoughts on what the other speakers have said. And if you've got any advice on practical tools in terms of engagement, you know, what methodologies would work, how can you start that relationship off on the right foot and create a legacy for when the sort of extractive projects aren't there? What are your thoughts on that?
Good morning, everyone. I'm calling from the west coast of the United States in California, so it's a little after 6 a.m. here. Happy to be here. So I'd like to just quickly go back to the answers. Like the other panelists, I agree with that would not have been my first choice, but I also find it interesting that the managing expectations was the number one, the winner in this question, this poll. For me, within FPIC, you know, it seems like we keep asking the question. We're trying to get an answer that we're not willing to, or we continue to ask. We want a yes is basically what industry is looking for. They're looking for a yes. And so when the communities are saying no, in whatever way, whether it's not having a dialogue or not wanting the project to go forward, or you know, whatever, wherever it is on the continuum, the company's industry tends to say that it must be because they don't understand, or they're trying to manage the expectations. It's more around, you know, getting the answer that they want. And so I think that's one of the things that you know, we need to get around. I mean, that's one of the big elephants in the room here, is are companies willing to have that answer that they don't want to hear? And if they are, then, or they have to adjust their own expectations. It's, so just the way that question was framed to me was almost not, wanting to hear the community's answer, if that makes any sense. So back to your question, Steve, around the managing, or excuse me, the tools that are available. In the Alaska context, one of the projects that we've been working with in the last 10 years now, that has been received poorly on a local level, it's been challenging because the partners don't have some of current, at least not in a way that the local people see it. There's no project that they can point to that they have a role in. And what I mean by that is at least the current partnership, because one of the major global partners left the partnership, you don't really have that available, that idea that Art suggested. So, but that would be, I think, one of the best tools available. If you can show people how you're working in other places and you're building relationships with other people, then that's a good way to move forward. But again, in the Alaska context, because we were so isolated, and if you aren't connected to other projects, then it really puts you in a difficult situation.
Yeah, absolutely. And Chris, I think you've got a few sort of comments on what's been said as well. Do you want to just come in on that quick?
Yeah, thanks, Steve. I think a lot of the discussion around FPIC is cast in a way that's negative, that is defensive, and always assumes that people are not going to give you the answer they want. But the point is that a lot of it's framed in a way that makes communities just an object where something is done to them, and you have to manage them, and you have to do this, and you have to do that. And I think a different way is to think of them as partners. In 30 years of working, not in the mining industry, but as an anthropologist with Indigenous peoples, I've never met a community that isn't interested in advancing their lives and economies for their children and grandchildren. And if that means developing the resources on which they live, and it can be done in a safe, environmentally and socially friendly way, they'll do it. And so I think one of the biggest opportunities missed by a lot of extractive companies is that they don't approach communities as partners, and in every way, politically, socially, and economically, and develop agreements around an equal partnership. I just think too often communities are seen as objects that things have to be done to until they agree with what the company or the government wants.
That's fantastic, and I'm so glad that you mentioned the word partnership as well, because that leads really nicely onto our next question, which is all about how you can create shared value. As you rightly say, Chris, working with communities and seeing them as partners is always the best way, rather than looking at it as a transactional topic. So the next question that we do have coming up, if you can all make your votes, would be fantastic, is what do you feel is the most important benefit that the extractives industry can provide Indigenous communities? So we've got a few options here. If you can think of any more, please do pop them in the box once we start it. But the options up here are job creation, opportunities for local businesses, education and training opportunities for the younger generation, and economic development. So out of those, what do you think provides the highest benefit? If you can make your votes now, we'll count down in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, another really strong response there. The highest feedback is around economic development, and that really seems to be one of the key things that extractive companies can provide the indigenous communities. Secondly, which is quite interesting, is looking at education and training opportunities for younger generations. Now, when you're looking at mapping stakeholders and looking at decision makers, it's often always important to consider younger generations and look at how that fits in with the cultural complexities in your individual regions. But if I can turn to yourself first, Art, and get your feedback on that. Would you agree with those results? What are your thoughts on them?
Yes, actually, when I first started this role as a practitioner liaison between the company and local Aboriginal communities, jobs were predominantly the first request, because that's all they could, when they're looking at us as a company and developing our projects, you know, they were just getting to know us too, and they seen us immediately as the jobs. And then as we grew with our exposure to these communities, opportunities for business was the next expectation, the next demand, if you were. And then it's right now to where economic development partnerships, actually sharing of the benefits of your activity on the land or whatever, and included in all of that, you have to, if you're to be successful in any job creation or business opportunities, you have to engage in education and training, which is really key. But you know, we found, you know, I found that you're not going to achieve any success unless you really have an overall corporate commitment to this is the direction you're going. You know, we understood quite early that the issues with Indigenous peoples are quite unique as a company develop any project, and it's uniqueness because the issues you're facing are culturally based issues, and you don't really face that in any other business activity that you do when you need to go forward with developing and building and operating a facility or a pipeline or whatever. And so it's really unique by that itself, and it takes a lot of different understandings internally, corporately, and so you really have to work hard to have a corporate capacity to be engaged and involved. And it does include all of the elements. For example, your job creation, of course, would include HR and the contractors that are working for you. Opportunities for business, you need to supply a capacity and understanding within your supply chain movement. And of course, economic development. We talk partnerships. You have to develop a capacity within your business development group so that they can also continue to look for opportunities that are quite relevant to that would make successful business partners. And then education training, of course. HR is a key component there, but even more key component is the partnerships with, because most companies aren't educators, so they're partnerships with existing educational institutes, government entities for support on initiatives, and of course the partnerships with the communities themselves and being successful in implementation. Because it's one thing to execute a deal, but the bigger challenge is always implement the commitments usually within that deal, and you need to have and reestablish a level of capacity internally to be able to be successful in the implementation.
Fantastic. That's great feedback, and thank you for that, Art. Rebecca, I'll come to yourself next, because I know that this is something that is very close to the work that you do. I know that you've got some practical tools that you might want to talk about on this, but I'd love to hear your feedback as well, Rebecca.
Well, thank you. First, I agree with everything Art said, and I really want to build on the points he made about culture, and then also the history he gave about job creations and opportunities for local business, and in education and economic development really was the track that corporations followed, I think, both in the United States and up in Canada, which are developed countries that have surrounding economies that you can work with. But when you're in a developing country, you don't have a really vibrant or much of surrounding economy. And so if you're really looking at these items that are listed, most of them probably aren't going to work right away. And I say that having come from a development institute. We're not a rights-based organization. We're a culturally appropriate development organization. And we really look at opportunities where corporations can have an impact in the economy, but also provide exit strategies, because you don't know from exploration if you're going to get to production. And so some of the things we talk about, it has much more to do with ethno-development. And if you're working in a different cultural context, you need ethno-development more than you need economic development, particularly when you're in a developing country. And what you'll see sometimes that a corporation can do, we call it a pre-engagement analysis, where you go in and you sort of map and get an understanding of the political landscape and understand who are the decision makers and what is the civic and civil society capacity in that community. If there are existing community-based organizations, you really want to pay a lot of attention to them. Many indigenous groups have mapping centers. For instance, in Asia, it was illegal for indigenous groups to own maps. So up until the 70s, from 1970 on, many of those communities have their own mapping centers. Why wouldn't a corporation partner with a local mapping center? One of the key points of data you're going to need is land usage data. So there's ways that you can build these pre-engagement partnerships before you really have made the decision if you're going to stay or if you're going to exit. But if you've partnered with a local mapping organization and they've done all the maps and they've come in with the land usage maps, and your decision is to leave, you've at least built capacity there that they want and need and will use, and you have an exit strategy. If you need to stay, you've built the next step strategy for engagement, because you now have land use data that is verified by the community. I mean, there's so many ways. There's traditional elders with traditional ecological knowledge. You can learn weather patterns. You can learn wildlife migratory patterns. All of this is information the company needs. And if you have a relationship with the community that's based upon mutual respect, not getting to the yes and doing what you want, managing them, but really respecting them in a full partnership, you will find a large number of opportunities, like I've just given by way of examples, that really continue to build these relationships and build the bridges from the corporation to the community. So when the time comes, you've got a solid relationship with pre-engagement analysis, preliminary engagement strategies, and you're moving forward. And I think that you really have to look at the cultural underpinnings on this, what's currently going on, the traditional knowledge, the weather. Also, there's education. There's tribal colleges that you can work with and build because your social environmental impact assessments give you no real practical information about the community. A tribal college could. A local mapping center could. I really think that's the link that most corporations miss when they begin engagement.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic answer as well, and thank you for that. And I love what you said about the exit strategy as well. And that really leads us on to the question around sustainable development. And Veronica, you might want to come in on this, but it's looking at how we can create a legacy instead of a dependency from the start and help that economic development, but making sure that it's sustainable, and you don't lose your cultural and your language preservation. Could you comment on that?
Sure. Everybody covered everything pretty thoroughly. The only thing that came to mind as Art and Rebecca were talking is and they touched on it, the importance of the cultural and language preservation or restoration, or whichever word you want to use. And it's a real concern rightly so, by local communities in Alaska. There's been a lot of data that shows that, the employment and economic opportunities are there. But what happens when it comes to your region? Well, most people, many people, take the economic benefits, the money, and run, so to speak, or they move into the cities, and the breakdown of the the social and local communities. And in our case, if we lose, if we get below 8 students in a community at a school, our schools close. And so when the school closes, the community ends. And so really, addressing that in a way that is embraced by the tribe or the community in an area. But the other piece is when we're trying to build trust, I'd like to just go back to the kind of tie some of these two questions together. Companies could go outside of their normal, whether it's cultural or language or, come at it a different angle. They could start to work in some of the areas, whether it's political and policy, that are of importance to the people. And what I mean by that, to build trust and make and support the things that they actually want, but may not have anything directly to do with the industry. And it's often posed to me, so what's their, what do they want? What can we do to build, relationships? And I will say, I'll give an answer that doesn't have anything to do with, mining or oil and gas or whatever. And it's not an answer that they want. They want to hear something about job creation or building partnerships, and that's all really important. But there are some big, big issues out there, whether it's tribal recognition or, health policy or, a number, housing that are huge depending on the area, that if industry got behind some of this stuff and helped, move some of the big stuff, then that would a lot of this little stuff or a lot of these things that make it difficult to get in and build those relationships would follow.
That's fantastic. No, that's great. Thank you. And I am slightly aware of time, so what we're going to do is we're going to move on to the next question. But I am aware that there's loads of questions that are coming on through the webinar. We will have a question and answer session after we've done all of the polls. So thank you. Keep posting those questions as this comes along. Even if we can't answer them, we will be covering these topics in both Houston and London. So please, we'll take those and we'll take them forward. The next question, though, is around engagement. So it's revisiting what we touched on at the start. And really, this question is asking where companies need to improve the most when it comes towards engaging with Indigenous communities. It'd be great to have your votes on that, and then I'll go to the panel and ask about practical advice that they might give to people in companies who are looking to engage in Indigenous communities. So if you could make your vote, the options are working together with Aboriginal community, they are embedding stakeholder engagement into operational culture, building trust and creating that shared value, that mutual benefit, improving environmental impacts of operations, or the creation of economic opportunities, or managing those expectations. So if you've created the opportunities, how do you manage the expectations once resources run out, once the workforce pulsates? So we'll count down in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, and another clear winner again. The thing that our audience think that we most need to build on at the moment is building that trust and creating that shared value. Now, Chris, you touched on this earlier when you mentioned about partnerships. If you had any practical advice that you would give to people that you've worked with in the past in how to begin and engage with that, what do you think that would be? Hi, Chris, are you still there? Okay, we may have lost Chris, but Art, if you're around, it'd be fantastic to hear your point of view and how we can work on that partnership and really some practical advice to generating that shared value, that shared value relationship.
Well, I couldn't agree more that building trust actually gives you some of the real strong tools to be able to do all the other elements of what needs needs to be improved and give you the ability to proceed down success in the other areas. But what's important from my perspective, and again, understanding that the communities are extremely diverse, their cultures are diverse, so try to make a pat answer on what their share of value would be, I think would not be the best advice, because I don't think I have a pat answer or a consistent answer for all the diverse communities. But what I can speak to is from our perspective, or a corporate perspective. And I think one thing the corporation needs to do is to, when they have to understand what share value it is really create an understanding that the process you're going through is a process that it's good business to do it. And that's when I say that is you build an internal business case that it's good business to make the effort, to go around, to make the effort to build trust, to build a relationship, to investigate what that share value might be. And when you take it to the business case, it takes it out of feeling like if it's a philanthropic exercise. And I tell you, the corporates do view those activities quite differently. And when it's embedded as a business case and there's value from a business aspect, then it's really sustainable, and there's certainly a lot more energy and resources that get committed to that effort. So building trust is really key, but taking it out of the philanthropic world within the corporation or the company, making it part of the business will give you all of the elements that you need to build trust, to go forward to build trust, and really work with each individual community, in some cases each different culture group, and look really to investigate what is shared value. You certainly have a good understanding of what you can bring to the table, but the real effort from the corporate side is to being really open to understand what they're coming to the table as what they see as value.
Fantastic, thank you for that. So it's really getting past that philanthropic mindset and looking at actually, as Rebecca said, you know, that there are incredible skills and knowledge that you can gain from Indigenous communities, looking at how will this benefit the company, and embedding that into the decision-making process as well. That sounds fantastic. Chris, I think you're back with us now, and you've been involved in years in Africa and in North America. So I'm sure in your time, you know, without naming any names or anything like that, you've seen where this can go wrong. What are the main things that we should look out for, and what would be your best advice for creating and for engaging?
Thanks, Steve. I think one of the fundamental issues is getting the mining or oil and gas people to recognize that, you know, much of the action, or at least the action that's very important to their business, is outside the fence. That's how I always see it. Because a lot of the technical people really just think that they've got their government permit and they can do what they like inside the fence. And, you know, a tribal leader once said to me, "Oh, we know how this works. We throw rocks over your fence and you throw schools and clinics back." And I think it's really an understanding of the importance of the external world to the operation. And that's not an easy thing. I worked for a boss once who denied that anything like a stakeholder existed. For him, he said, it's only shareholders who are important. And happily, much of the industry's moved beyond that now and recognizes that there are different people with different interests outside the fence who can impact your business. And so I think getting to understand the importance of outside the fence is a critical step. And the other one is realizing that it's everyone's responsibility within a business unit. So getting the accountants, say at a mine site, to realize that they can't pay their bills in 90 days when, you know, the village business that supplies them with something, you know, has no cash flow and expects to be paid, you know, every week. Or HR, who have hiring practices that are completely unrealistic, you know, in a developing world context. Or security guards who think it's okay, you know, to lock people up or beat them or whatever. So, you know, and even the technical people. I think that a lot of it is around not just having community relations people who are firefighters. Oh, you know, there's a roadblock. You guys go and sort it out, and realizing that it's everyone's responsibility in a business unit to engage well, you know, with external stakeholders. Those are things that I think are often ignored to the peril of the business when, you know, in terms of what they're trying to do.
Yeah, some fantastic points there. You know, it's that shift of mindset from actually it's not shareholders that matter, it's stakeholders. Everyone's a stakeholder, and really looking at embedding this into the whole business culture. You know, everyone all the way from board level down to technical members of staff, engineers, HR, supply chain, procurement staff. You know. They really need to get on board with this. Now, Rebecca, I'm going to come to you because you mentioned that you might answer this slightly differently. So what are your thoughts on this?
Well, I'm in agreement completely with what's been said to date. I would want to pull out something Art said, though, about we've already talked about the importance of shared values, and the examples we've given are ones that you've given shared values from a corporate perspective of jobs and local business opportunity. And we've talked about how there's other values in the community, and it's a two-way flow for shared values. We have to be looking at what the community might want by way of language or sacred sites. But in that, that's the early visioning of what I call a development process. Art called it philanthropic activities, but I think corporations have to come to terms with it's about community development. And so that early philanthropic process that he talked about is really a very legitimate development process. And corporations need to either build in-house the technical capacity for this kind of community economic development, which I would call ethno-development because of the cultural underpinnings in this case, or they need to find reliable intermediaries. And they need to, when they look at that, they need to look at the intermediaries from a point of, do they have Indigenous people on staff and on the board? Have they actually got successful community projects that are sustained after the corporate funds have moved on? You want to look at these highly skilled, credible ethno-development intermediaries because you're in an area you don't understand right now, and you've got to get in there and you've got to begin to understand. Example, a lot of the opportunities that are economic from a corporation can be extremely disruptive to the culture. A culture that looks at wide distribution and sharing can get at odds with another culture that brings in and gives jobs to a few people and begins creating have and have-nots in a community that will eventually react to that. So you could be doing a great job creating employment and still have a community that gets divided and resents the corporation because you've missed the cultural underpinnings. So this piece about ethno-development is real. It's a profession, and I would really recommend that corporations begin to look at it and begin to look at intermediaries that can move and have track records in sustainable projects at the community level, and then call upon them. It's not philanthropic so much as it's a legitimate development process, and there are experts out there that can provide this. And it needs to be operational. Companies, I don't think, can move quick enough into the community. They're always worried about raised expectations, but they need an agile force that can move in quickly and understand the community dynamics and begin to map the decision-making. They usually sit for about 2 or 3 years outside the community, and expectations are going crazy anyway. So you might as well get in there much earlier and get in there in a really close way.
Fantastic. Thank you for that, and I love that theme of ethno-development as well, which is brilliant. Veronica, I'm going to come to you again. I think you've got a quick point on this as well. Is that right?
Well, I don't want to take from anything that Rebecca just said because everything was brilliant and amazing. From the U.S. Alaska context, one of the things that we need to implement is what is available in other areas, primarily in Australia and in South America and Africa, actually, is more tools for the practitioners, whether it's the through the university or through a private entity, but we need to build more competency capacity within our companies to be able to do all this. And I know that we don't have it in Alaska. We have access to some of the skill building and social education opportunities, but it's all online, which is good, but nothing in the United States at this time. So I think that's one of the areas that we really need to kind of double down on, even in the times of low prices and a little bit of a lag in our industry.
Okay, that's fantastic. Thank you so much for that. I'm going to quickly turn to a question from the audience as well. Now, Abigail has asked, what are the best examples of extractive operations that have actually benefited indigenous communities financially and in terms of economic development? So Art, if I come back to you on that, in your years of experience with TransCanada, can you pick out any examples, and if they have really benefited the community, why is that? What did they do right, and how did they approach it, and why do you think that was a result?
Well, I would say our oil sands in Fort McMurray, if you look at the Fort McKay First Nation and communities around there, and I was fortunate enough to be around, or unfortunate, whatever your perspective is, to have relatives up in that area for decades, and to witness part of the poverty, the exclusion of being involved in broader society, to where the impact of the development up in that area has created wealth, very strong wealth within those communities, continue to not only create a wealth, but a larger influence from the First Nations communities in that area now, to where they really help direct a lot of the development and the changes and how the corporate world, it's a huge employer of Aboriginal people, not only in that area. It's an employer either directly in the activities or indirectly to the industries. My own family, for example, I've got 3 daughters who are single mothers who are all working for companies that support that area up there and are raising their kids and very independent and self-sufficient. But I know a large percentage of Aboriginal people are employed. They're the largest employer of Aboriginal people in Canada. So that is one area that has grown to understand the issues locally a lot better, has grown to understand the value of working with the local Aboriginal folks and involving them. There's still a long ways to go, a lot of work yet to be done, but that's really great. But I think that's the biggest area where you can see a difference in the course of a few decades of benefits when you're looking at the economic development right down to the measurements of the issues with poverty and that the communities face more universally in Canada. They're seeing some dramatic differences there, for example.
Fantastic. That's great. Thank you for that. And I am aware of time, but I do want to bring both Chris and Rebecca in on this. And I'm going to throw another caveat in there as well. I mean, as I'm sure you're all aware from the news, oil prices have reduced, gold prices have reduced, and those commodities are at very low prices at the moment. I'd like to hear, Chris, I think you've got an example, and then Rebecca, if I can hear from you, what impact that commodity price has on this, and how we can go back to generating that financial benefit. So Chris, I'll come to you first. Do you have any examples of this? Where would they be, and why was it so successful?
Sure. I mean, I appreciate the question, but it's one I hear a lot, where people are quite skeptical about benefits coming to local communities, including Indigenous communities. I think the best example I'm aware of, and I have to declare that it was something I was involved in, is the Ahafo, A-H-A-F-O, gold mine in Ghana, in West Africa. And I think if any of our participants are interested, they should take a look at the website for the Newmont Ahafo Development Foundation. And this picks up the commodity price change as well, because that foundation was set up where we realized that royalties being paid and taxes being paid by the company were not really getting back to the local communities who were impacted the most. So in discussion with the leaders, and this is there's 3 black and white agreements over this that were made public, a foundation was set up which was funded by 1% of net profit and $1 an ounce of gold. And the reason there's that duality there is that it evens out the commodity price ups and downs. And that foundation is truly community run and has been enormously successful in raising the standard of education, health, infrastructure, cultural activities, and so on throughout the 180,000 people who live in the 10 villages around the mine. And I'd encourage people to look at that. And the EU Africa Chamber of Commerce recently declared the Ahafo project the best, in class for positive social impact, and that's on their website as well. So that's just an example, and it also picks up the commodity price change impacts.
Fantastic, that's excellent. And if I can quickly come to you as well, Rebecca, what are your thoughts, and do you have any examples as well?
Well, one, just to answer the question at large, if without the commodity drop in prices, it's like Shell did an interesting thing in the Niger Delta where it really turned over funds to local communities to make their own decisions around, which was very empowering, very capacity building, and they used insurance, health insurance, and it spread to several hundred villages by the time the program was fully developed, with them making their decision that they wanted local health coverage, which isn't on your shared value list at all, but it's what comes out of the community's own decision making organically. But we're looking at a different time now around the commodity prices, and this goes back to some of the things that Veronica said that actually have already been said around what communities want. And we all know budget constraints are a reality. But there was 2 examples, I think, that were really hold forth for our audience, in that in Brazil, we had a company that was a joint venture between Shell and Cosan around sugarcane and biofuels. Well, what the community wanted was they wanted their land protected, and Shell actually worked together so that the joint venture itself passed a policy that they would not buy any sugarcane from disputed lands, because there's really huge land disputes down there, and it's very violent with the plantation owners and the indigenous people fighting over disputed land. This wasn't a program. It wasn't costing a whole lot of money. It was a policy that the company jointly worked with Cosan and put in place. They also won the Bon Sucor, which is the Good Sugar Award for the year, in initiating this policy. Another example was in Russia. The corporation that was moving over there actually decided to recognize the indigenous people. In this case, it was the NIFCA. Again, no large program. They just went around to the other side of the table and sat with the indigenous people and said, we recognize them as indigenous people. It changed Russia's entire response to the NIFCA people. It wasn't a high-dollar project. It was those kinds of alignments and support and true, genuine partnerships of respect that cost the company very little and that carried huge impact. The NIFCAs went across Canada telling their story to the First Nations of how they got recognized by the Russian government because this corporation stood with them. There are tremendous opportunities out there. And given these budget constraints, maybe this is a real silver lining for corporations to rethink how they can. It's not just coming out and doing stuff to us. It's standing beside us and doing stuff with us. And these are good examples that were very low cost and I think are wonderful to get at the change we have in the commodity prices right now. And that there's real hope out there for exciting opportunities beyond money. Money can be a transaction, and it's just proven it's not enough. It's a relationship we want.
That's fantastic, and that's such a positive point to bring. You know, looking at something like a drop in prices and saying this is a great way to change the mindset, and to look at readdressing the way that we're thinking. Now, I am aware. Sorry.
We have a workshop at the UN Permanent Forum on Indigenous Peoples, April 23rd, that, again, we would invite ethical corporation and the corporations to it. And it's right with the Indigenous Peoples Forum at the UN. So we're having corporations come in so we can all get to know each other. And Mitsubishi is sponsoring it for us. It's April 23rd.
Fantastic. A great plug in there, Rebecca, as well.
Yeah.
So thank you for that, and I'm sure that workshop is going to be really useful as well. Now, unfortunately, we are running out of time at the moment, so what I'll do is I'll come back to each panelist just to sum up in one word, if you could give some advice on how to engage with Indigenous people, whether that's engagement or partnership or anything. I'll let you have a think on that and let me know what your one word to sum up how we can practically do this would be. But before I do that, I just want to thank everyone for taking part. There's been fantastic participation. Although we are short of time here at the moment, at our events, you know, we do have 2 days packed full of networking, targeted, interactive sessions where we can really address your questions. So, you know, we will get these sent through, and we'll take all of your questions on board when we go into those sessions as well. Don't, you know, if you want any information about London or about our Houston Extractors event, please don't hesitate to contact us. We'll post some links on the chat box as well. But yeah, thank you so much for attending. I hope that you found this useful. We will be delivering all of the recordings to you once they're ready, probably sometime next week. So I hope that you can recap and take back a lot of the points that have been mentioned. I guess for me, what really stood out is looking at this partnership and looking at the ethno-development perspective, moving away from philanthropic mindsets and looking at shared value, utilizing the knowledge and skills that Indigenous communities have. So before we finish, I'll just come to each panelist. I'll come to yourself first, Chris. One word, one bit of advice, what would you say?
Relationships, relationship, relationship.
There you go, fantastic. And from yourself, Rebecca?
I'll add on that with respect, respect, respect.
Okay, brilliant. So we've got relationship, respect. If I can come to you, Veronica?
I'm going to throw commitment in there. If you're there now during the bad times, they'll be there for you, with you during the good times.
Fantastic. That's brilliant. So relationships, respect, and commitment, just to follow that up. Art's unfortunately left us at the moment because we have overrun slightly. Thank you so much for joining in. I'll send these recordings through later. And if you've got any feedback, please do get in touch with us, reach out, and we'd love to involve you in this really important conversation. Thanks very much, and goodbye.